Council, just a reminder to pull your microphones close so that you can be heard. Okay, roll call.
Jizzle, Neal,
Here.
Olson,
Here.
Luce,
Here.
Zittergruen,
Here.
Hadley,
Here.
Johnson.
Here.
Public comment. Is there anyone who wishes to approach the council of something that is not on the agenda? Seeing none. MEU update. Carly. And just a reminder, and it pulls up real easy.
Hi,
There you go. Hello.
you can hear me now? Okay,
Yep,
cool.
that's good.
I'm Carly Hayden Foster, Chair of the MEU Task Force. Nice to see all of you. I am here just to provide an update as far as what we have been up to recently. Previous updates are available at the city's Dropbox folder, and so all of the information is there. So just as a reminder, this task force was created in December 2020. We began meeting in 2021, January, and there were 5 specific tasks that we were asked to do: conduct a series of learning events, convene meetings with key stakeholders, respond to the recent invitation by the IUB to bring specific issues regarding municipalization process. I'm just giving you the super short version because I'm not going to read this whole report at you. But there were 5 things. The last 2 were commission a MEU feasibility study to be completed by fall of 2021. Obviously didn't happen yet. And provide a recommendation to the City Council about whether and when to hold a second referendum about establishing an MEU. We have been, to this point, actively pursuing the first 3 bullet points, and at this point we think we're at a point where we're going to move towards those last couple of bullet points, at least by the end of the year. And so this report that was shared with you, we have completed some of the MEU education events. It's been good to see some of you there. Those have all been held right here in City Council chambers. We have held 3 of those already, and there are 2 more upcoming. And so tomorrow night, right here, 5:15, Stephen Pick, General Manager and CEO for Spencer Municipal Utilities, will be here. Answering some specific questions that we have prepared for all of these speakers, and then taking questions from audience. So if you have any questions, if you want to talk to a general manager of an MEU, this is your opportunity. And then Tuesday, August 2nd, 5:15, Brian Crambier, President and CEO of My Energy, will be joining us. Same place. And so those meetings can all be attended either in person here in this space or via Zoom. And so I encourage people to attend those. I do want to request up to $2,000, and that is for funding regarding transcription and summaries of the video recordings of these events. And so you might remember we already applied for and received a grant, and that grant will offset some of these costs. We hope that those costs would allow us to edit and maintain the Zoom recordings, to develop an executive summary, providing like minute markers and transcripts so that if people are looking for specific answers to specific questions, they can look through them more quickly, and then sharing those out. And there will be a total of 5 meetings, and so we think that that can be done with $2,000. So that is our funding request at this point. As you are probably aware, on July 11th, the Iowa Utilities Board did decline to hear the City of Decorah's complaint regarding the request for utility data. And so that is obviously not what we hoped that they would do, but the work of our task force continues. And we were reassured by the wording that was included in the IUB's decision that pointed out that should Alliant engage in the local process and put forth its own numbers, facts, or figures, as Alliant did prior to the previous Decorah municipalization vote, the board would have the authority to ensure IPL was using correct, the most up-to-date information when speaking to customers. And so we were glad that that was included in there. we are, at least, the silver lining here is that we are no longer waiting to hear back from the IUB. So now we can move on to our next tasks. And we think that we will be able to move towards just updating a feasibility study. And we hope that we would be able to do that within the next few months. And at this point, I'm hoping that we can wrap up our activities and make a recommendation by the end of the year. So I would likely be back before you after our next MEU task force meeting. So our task force meets again on August 17th. By that, we'll discuss, and we haven't met yet as a task force since we got this IUB decision. So we'll be doing that. We'll be discussing, and we'll be figuring out the parameters of what an updated feasibility study might look like. And so I would be back at the earliest city council meeting after August 17th. With an update regarding movement towards that, an updated feasibility study.
Okay, council.
Thank you.
Comments?
Thank you. I have a couple questions. Actually, maybe requests, and it can be for just thoughts, things I've been thinking about in an email I got. First of all, thank you so much for the education meetings. Well, I haven't attended all of them. The one that I did attend was phenomenal, and I'm looking forward to the next two. And also your continued work on this. I know it's still a hotbed issue for lots of people, and your tireless work. I just want to commend you and thank you.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions come forth, and as I was thinking about the last municipal vote, falling in line with education, and I don't want to put more work on you, and maybe it's something we need to do, but I would like to see a conversation with someone who can explain the process of applying to the Iowa Utility Board and that funding process, right? So there was a lot of numbers thrown around about the whole, it'll cost $1 million, it'll cost $2 million to even talk to the Iowa Utility Board. And I am wondering if the task force can figure out who we could talk to get a more accurate understanding of that process, those types of bonds that could be used, and then also, on the flip side, if we did the municipalization and we went to the Iowa Utility Board and they said, yes, you could operate at a lower cost with similar or better reliability, well, then what does that also look like for a city to put in those funds? I think there's so many questions about how this gets funded, and that number keeps growing. It's going to cost us $7 million to apply to the Iowa Utility Board, right? I mean, people will just say any number. And given you're doing such a great job with education, I was hoping maybe we could dial that in a little bit.
I think that's a perfectly reasonable request.
Okay.
Okay.
And other than that, I think that I tied it all in, I think, into that question. So thank you.
Thanks.
Anything on this side?
Where is the information available for tomorrow's meeting?
So it is available in our Dropbox. I have extra copies with me if you just want one.
Sure.
Okay. It's been in Decorah News. I'm sure it'll be in Decorah News again.
Thank you.
I did hear a rumor at my listening session yesterday that you guys were disbanding and it was over. Just wanted to verify it's not disbanding and you're not over.
No one
Great.
has informed me of any such thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
I did have a question.
Yeah.
And this might be for John as well, in the IUB ruling not to hear the case, they specifically mentioned that they would hold Alliant accountable for any data that they release in conjunction with any MEU efforts if we were to put it forth for an election again.
Mm-hmm.
But they specifically mentioned Alliance numbers. Alliant didn't actually present figures. It was a third party that presented at the last, just like Decorah Power presented on behalf, if you would say, the city, and then the other company presented on behalf of Alliant. Does that language allow them to say, wasn't us?
No, I don't think so. I mean, you could check, but if it's someone who is working for them and they've been working closely with them, I don't think that they're allowed to pass the buck like that.
I think the decision specifically mentioned contractors for Alliant were included in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Great. That was my concern.
Anything else?
Real quick, Carly, I see you're having Spencer, Iowa come in tomorrow. Are they currently an active utility,
Yes.
municipal utility?
Yep.
Was there did anybody reach out to one of these places that may not have gone so well with their public utility? Like maybe they tried one and it didn't work out? Did we contact anybody like that and see if they could?
There's just one of those, as far as if you're talking about the one that had, in Hudson,
Well, like
that
Hudson
had a
was one,
municipal utility.
right.
And then opted out. They are the only one that has done that.
Okay.
And yes, we've had some communication with them, but we did not include them in this education series because we asked a standard set of questions of all of the speakers, and they were all about active, what's it like to operate an MEU now? And so we wanted to ask the same set of questions to all of the speakers.
And as a liaison to the board, I've heard this enough times to just say that it might be useful to, again, state how it is that Hudson is not a very useful example for us to consider as we're discerning whether moving forward in this process is the right decision for the people of Decorah. Hudson's situation was unique in that half of the city was served by Alliant and half of the city was served by Mid-American Energy for a much lower price. And so for them it was as simple as, can we just jump in? I'm right about that. Am I getting the facts right, or was it another provider?
It was the city of Hudson and Mid-American.
That's what it was, yeah. And so like Hudson had access to, a lower cost provider, right? There's already servicing half their town. And so it's just not the same decision that we're facing.
Because if we were facing the decision to have Mid-America be our provider, that would be a very different question.
That would indeed be a different question.
Okay, anything,
Mid-America.
anything else? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for the work. I appreciate it. Okay, consent agenda.
Item A, minutes of the July 5, 2022 regular meeting. Item B, claims. Item C, ridiculous days special permit. Item D, renewal of Class C liquor license with Sunday sales for Corner Bar. Item E, renewal of Class C liquor license with Sunday sales for Fairfield Marriott. Item F, renewal of Class E liquor license with Class B wine and Class C beer with Sunday sales for Backwater Spirits and more.
Zittergren moves the consent agenda.
Hadley was second.
Motion made by Zittergren, seconded by Hadley. I did notice that they're only blocking off just one block this year versus the whole downtown.
Correct. They are blocking off one block for traffic,
Yep.
but the special event permit doesn't incorporate anybody else that might have right away
Oh, I've got you.
displays.
Okay. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Consider the MEU request for funding for transcription of the MEU educational sessions.
Okay, so you heard Carly as part of her MEU task force update, the request of up to $2,000. Now that is for the full expense, correct, Carly? Just to make sure. Of which a third of that can be reimbursed by the grant that the city has already been awarded for the MEU task force. So it would be an expense of $2,000 with a third of that reimbursed back.
Luce would move to authorize up to $2,000 for the MEU task force.
Neil, a second.
Motion made by Luce, seconded by Neal, to authorize up to $2,000. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call?
Luce,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson.
No.
Consider approval of the site plan for Skyline Lanes for new 54-foot by 16-foot new addition. Can I get some background on that, please?
Sure. So this is a subsequent site plan other than the large one that's already well underway and approved by council. In addition to that, they want to add 54 by 16 feet. Variances were needed, sought, and awarded by Board of Adjustment. Planning and Zoning is recommending approval. During this, I do want to note, as part of this discussion, during this review, our city code, as it talks about commercial site plans, our code says that if a building is increased by more than 25% of its existing footprint, that it triggers this commercial site plan review. The questions were posed on, do we consider what's already been approved, and is that part of the consideration, or is it the building before that, since that's what's done? And John pointed out that the way our code reads, it's actually pursuant to the way the buildings were when this ordinance was codified, which was 1993. Was it part of the 93 revisions, I believe?
I can't tell looking online because it was revised in 93, 2004, and 2006. So could be as far back as 93.
So one of those three. And so in theory, for the staff to apply that rule, we would have to look at what that building had in existence in 2006, 3, or 93. So also pointing out that Stanley Manufacturing, if Stanley Manufacturing wants to add 30, 40,000 square foot, that's nowhere close to 25% of their existing footprint. And so that is a staff review and issuance of building permit. Whereas a Mill Street Mocha drive-through coffee shop, which takes no existing building and adds a building the size of one of those portable garages you can buy from a hardware store, that triggers a full-blown commercial site plan review with P&Z review, council review. So there's been some discussions among staff of what this should look like. Does council have any idea, while this item is of consideration, what you would like to see? Do you agree with the existing language, or would you like to see some changes to that? One thing I will throw out there is our existing code when it comes to stormwater, 1 acre is the trigger for a stormwater requirement.
If there's something that the staff, is assessing that doesn't rise to the level of needing the full site plan review, but the staff has concerns or questions, does the staff have a mechanism of bringing it to the council for input?
John, thoughts on that?
I think they could always bring it to the council for input if they so choose. I mean, if the code says this may be approved at staff level, they can approve it. But if they have questions about it, I think they could always bring it to council. I'm trying to think of an example where that's been done, but it seems to me it's maybe been done to get council input before. I don't know if it was site plan or something else.
The question maybe was a little leading, but my point is if there's something that could be handled at the staff level, but you all feel like it's a bigger than staff level decision, I trust your discretion in coming to the council for direction. So that'd be my preference, is not to go through the ordinance amendment process when we have competent staff at the wheel that can bring it to us if they so choose.
Well, I think right now they have to.
Unless we go back and determine that in 2006, 3, or 93,
Right.
that, yeah.
I guess my opinion would be that we encourage staff to come forth with a revision to the code that doesn't require being able to tie a specific building to a code revision that nobody knows. Unless you go back and look at the plats and historically and figure out which code revision you're operating under to get a clear answer, I think it's bad code. So my ask would be that you and John look at somehow cleaning up the language so it's not based on unclear precedent.
Maybe it could be revised to today.
So
Right? So starting now, I like the idea. I do think it's important to have site review by council at that point, but you're trying to figure out what's the baseline to do it. And maybe we just say, take the existing buildings right now, because we're looking at it today.
Well, but then we're still tying it to a specific date.
Well, but then maybe, but that's important. I think then 10 years, 20 years from now, council will have to do the same thing again.
In our subdivision ordinance, which we've recently become familiar with, we've written our law such that you can't get around an ordinance through a series of steps. I know that there's lots of laws like that, especially related to financial transactions, that if the sum of a bunch of legal activities is an illegal activity, you can't do it. And so I feel like maybe the ordinance could be written such that, you know, if there's a substantive change within a period of years, you know, if you add 20% to your building and then wait a week and then add 20% more to your building, that's clearly flouting the intentions of this ordinance. So that'd be one way to clean it up, is just say, you know, you can't get around this ordinance by just spacing out your renovations. I don't know. I mean, that might be one way to do it.
I don't know. I think using percentage of a large building as your basis is kind of counterproductive. I think that anything larger than the size of the average house in Decorah should be looked at. I also think 1 acre of land, you know, for water is a pretty big parcel in Decorah because we don't have a lot of undeveloped land. So I'm wondering if we need to make it more restrictive in a sense by looking at smaller parcels. I mean, you know, if Walmart wants to put, you know, 25% more onto their building, that's a pretty big building.
Yeah.
Whereas if, you know, somebody much smaller retailer wants to, then I don't know. I just think that there should be just a hard and fast. If it's larger than this, it gets site plan. And if it's more than a 1/4 acre, at least staff should look at how they could improve their wastewater or their water.
Yeah.
And square footage of improvement as opposed to percentage.
How do
of-
everyone else? I mean, it does.
No, I agree with you, Kirk. I think,
What's that?
You said a 1/4 acre?
Well, I'm just saying, I think it should be more restrictive than 1 acre because there isn't, I can't think of too many places in Decorah where there's a single acre available for development. I mean, there are some, but not many. I mean, there are lots of places that might be ripe for redevelopment that are an acre in size, but, you know, I don't know.
Are there models for other cities in terms of the number, in terms of square footage, 10,000 square feet, or I don't know, what's the?
And it is across the board on whether it's square footage of the addition of the building or the site itself, the size of the site, percentage of the building. It is pretty much per community what fits you best. For point of reference, the scooter site on Short is almost nearly a 1/2 acre, almost exactly a 1/2 acre. So just for scale.
I agree with Kirk. I don't know the best mechanism, but I do think it should be more restrictive. I think the
I think
significance of changing
you know,
development.
particularly, you know, using scooters as an example, you know, there's a business that sits right next to the dry run, and we aren't looking at their wastewater, at their water, as we should, maybe. I don't know.
It does feel to me like conflating stormwater and the site plan review process into one conversation maybe isn't the most helpful, because I agree with some of what Kirk is saying and not everything that Kirk's saying. And so I maybe we can split this conversation into 2 pieces. For my part, I think it's vital for Decorah's economic future and future planning that we allow Decorah to thicken up in the right places over the next couple decades, and that means, you know, every time that we make the building process more onerous or have more hurdles to jump through, we're also making it more expensive, and that makes it harder for, you know, people who want to expand the provision of their services or grow their small business to do that. And you know, it's easy to sort of pass a law, but then remember that the shade tree, you know, the mechanic at the corner who wants to buy his neighbor and expand his service and hire a couple extra mechanics, like, their job just got a lot harder to do that. So I feel like we need to hold that in tension.
Yeah, but you know, thinking about, let's take Fairway for example. They want to redo their parking lot, and they need to redo their water drainage and such, and they're being held to a pretty high standard, which is fine. Scooters comes in new, they're on a 1/2 acre, so they don't get reviewed, and they are putting in, you know, a big driveway and lots of, you know, concrete, and we're not doing anything with their runoff. It's not, and you know, how many little businesses like that are there out there that could, you know, put in a swale of some sort to help with their water. I mean, I think it's sort of simple.
Mayor, I guess I'm going to bring this back. Hadley will make approval of the site plan for Skyline Lanes, and
Thank you.
and look forward to hearing from P&Z, the building administrator, and you on possible action on other stuff.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Second.
Motion made by Hadley, seconded by Zittergruen to approve the site plan for Skyline Lanes for the new 54-foot by 16-foot new addition. Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Hadley,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
Then we'll look for you to bring back some more information for
Yep.
us. Okay, conduct a public hearing on plans, specifications, form of contract, and taking bids for the Decorah 2022 Pleasant Avenue Improvement Project. Travis,
Yes, so,
oh,
if you
let's
want to
say
open
you-
it first, or?
let's see. Yeah, let's do that. I'll open the public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to this public hearing on the 2022 Pleasant Avenue Improvement Project? Hearing and seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Now, if I give some background, that would be on number
Nine.
9. Consider action on the on Decorah 2022 Pleasant Avenue Improvement Project. There we go.
Okay, so this was a portion of the street improvement plan for this year that it had its own uniqueness about it and pretty in-depth, so staff recommended doing it as a separate bid versus the 2022 asphalt project. One of the reasons being that we thought a chip seal bid on this section would suit well. Well, the engineer's estimate was, the bid amount was $255,916.25, which amounts to about 20% over the engineer's estimate, with the largest share of that coming in at the chip seal, cost of chip seal. With this cost, staff believes that, now in this market, this is hard to gauge, but at that rate, based on where our 2022 street improvement project came in at, staff is recommending we actually reject the bid, rebid it, and bid as a base alternate, including next spring as the completion date, which would, one, potentially lower the cost of the chip seal contractor's bid, and two, bid as an alternate HMA, hot mix asphalt. And so if the chip seal bid comes in this high again, we can award the alternate of hot mix asphalt, which is what we would call normal street, not concrete.
Hadley would make a motion to reject the bid for the Pleasant Avenue improvement project.
Neal.
Luce with second.
Okay, motion made by Hadley, seconded by Luce to reject the bid. Any further discussion? Hearing seen none, roll call?
Hadley,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Olson.
Aye.
And thus, we move on to 10, consider resolution setting the date for a public hearing for the Decorah 2022 Pleasant Avenue Improvement Project.
Yes, since item 9 was a rejection, item 10, to have a quicker turnaround, we placed this as a placeholder. If the council approves, since we already have most of the bid documents drafted for the chip seal portion, converting that unit pricing over on the alternate with asphalt is a pretty quick turnaround for us. So we wanted to have on the agenda for council consideration to set a public hearing for, August 15th, which would be then the potential award.
Make a motion to set a public hearing for August 15th on the Pleasant Avenue reconstruction bid process.
Second.
Motion made by Neal, seconded by Olson. Further discussion? Hearing seen none. Roll call?
Neal,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen.
Aye.
Motion carried. Consider a resolution setting a date for a public hearing for amending sections 17.16.135, 17.68.030, and 17.80.030 for relating to fence requirements. Travis?
Yes, so we'll start with these proposed changes have been recommended by planning and zoning. These proposed changes are, we had areas of code that were in conflict with each other with the site triangle. So we're the intersection of two streets or a street off an alley. There would be in our code that you can't obstruct site between 2 feet and 10 feet. But our own ordinance would allow for encroachment within that site triangle based on these setbacks of fences. Great example are alleyways. The fence could be built right up to the property line of the alleyway. However, a structure as part of that must have been at least 5 foot. Thank you, Greg. 5 foot off. And so what the majority of these changes are to bring those sections of code in line with each other, providing for setbacks for line of sight. There is a height change. There was some language that was not very clear, especially as it related to a corner property and where a 4-foot height restriction would come into play as opposed to an 8-foot. And so we did propose a change to clarify that. Another section included living fences. So if I plant a row of shrubs, bushes, our current code actually requires that be permitted. So a building permit needs to be applied for and awarded and then inspected. Knowing that we want to still maintain that site triangle and still have the same, we did define living fences separately and said they are required to follow the guidelines, the requirements of the code, but not be permitted. So that would still have an enforcement mechanism that if I plant a row of bushes right up against the alley, the city can come back and have me remove them. Is that everything? Again, sorry, meant to point this out too. This is setting a public hearing. This is not approving the actual changes.
Right. Yeah, I make a recommendation that we set a public hearing for amending our sections on fences.
Second.
Motion made by Neal, seconded by Olson, to set a public hearing for, the date for public hearing for amending these sections. And do you put that in the motion, August 15th?
August 15th.
Okay, that's good. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Neal,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Luce,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Hadley.
Aye.
Motion carried. Consider a resolution setting a date for a public hearing for amending sections 17.08 and 17.52 related to loading and parking space requirements.
So again, preface with the proposed changes were recommended by planning and zoning, and also that, again, this is simply setting a public hearing on. This is not the actual consideration. So these parking minimums, as you hear talked about a lot, that's what this is referring to, were parking minimums. Proposed changes are basically a complete redo of a previous discussion had by planning and zoning that during the interim period between managers never made its way to council for consideration, which actually from a staff standpoint was a good thing. This allowed for staff, more staff involvement and input in this process. And so this is a complete redo. Again, takes a lot of what our current code is simply using English to spell out the requirements of different uses creates a nice table for easy interpretation of these requirements. Both SUDAS and Building Code were consulted in the drafting of this, and typically if there was a conflict between the two, the lesser of the two were chosen, most of the time aligning with SUDAS. There were a few instances that neither were selected, but those were very few and far between, right, Greg and Jeremy? So those for listening at home, Greg pointed out that SUDAS would talk about the difference between a superstore and a superstore with grocery. Wasn't that one of them? Or a but fast food drive-through, fast food with sit-down, and a lot of differentiation between those.
Can you tell me what GFA means?
Gross floor area.
Thanks.
Gross floor?
So square footage of the floor.
Multiple levels.
Okay.
And did
Yeah.
you,
Somebody forgot to mop.
in this particular one, did you have a date?
August 15th as
Okay.
well.
Luce would move a public hearing for the setting of the parking limit or loading changes. Have the date mentioned.
Second. Hadley.
Motion made by Luce, seconded by Hadley. Any further discussion?
I'll just jump in here to say two quick things. I know that this isn't the time to debate the substance of the recommendation from P&Z.
It is actually.
Oh, great. Well, then I'm going to start. Then I've got three things to say, Mayor. Can I amend my? Okay. The first. Thank you, John. The first thing to say, I guess, for me is that I urge my fellow council members between now and next August 15th to read up on parking minimums, on where they came from, on how they function in cities, on how many cities across the United States are moving past them as unfortunate error in city planning. I don't necessarily know if that's the right decision for Decorah, but I do think that making choices about our land use, and especially how we devote land use to parking that often, in many places in our city, not everywhere, sits empty, is a choice that's very impactful for our city, for our financial solvency. And so I just encourage you to learn what you can. If you want some resources, I have some, or maybe, Travis or Jeremy or Greg or someone else could point you in some good directions. Nathan down at Upper Iowa Explorerland is not Nathan, Aaron is a great resource on these issues, I think. The choices we make with land use are, one of the things we do that actually really, really makes a difference for our city. It's important that we get this one right in particular.
So are you suggesting we don't have parking minimums?
I'm not sure. I'm suggesting that I think that these are an improvement towards something that could be even better, maybe, in that they, for the most part, reduce parking minimums. But when we have parking minimums, we're saying that that if you're building a store, you don't know the right number of parking spots to provide by yourself. And that's not the way that Decorah was built, not the traditional portion of Decorah. We trusted stores and home builders and others to know what was right for them. I'll speak for myself. I would never buy a house without a parking spot. But I could imagine one day, if I'm retired and no longer able to drive for one reason or another, I could very much imagine resenting that I have to pay for a parking spot baked into the price of my house because a city told the person building the house for seniors right downtown, well, you still got to have 2 parking spots per house.
Do you think it would be wise of the city to allow people to build a house without a parking spot?
I genuinely don't have firm answers on that, especially, I just am encouraging council to learn about parking minimums and consider that maybe, SUDAS is a society of engineers, and engineers, they make money when concrete is poured. They make money when roads are bigger and things are farther apart and infrastructure is more expensive. And I think it's important to consider alternative visions for how parking can be managed in cities. In particular, my understanding of the SUDAS parking models is that they developed their model by going to two suburban, not representative of Decorah, but two suburban cities, like kind of suburbs on the edge of cities, where there was no transit in place, where there was very little in the way of walkability. And they looked at, various uses on their third busiest day of the year. And they said, all right, that's the amount of parking that we need. Well, Decorah's situation is not the same as the situation of those test cases. And I don't know if we should be forcing, private people, private business owners, private home builders to be, installing parking for the third busiest day of the year, for the same reason I don't build my dining room for hosting Thanksgiving dinner. I build it for hosting my family, and sometimes it's a little crowded, and that's just a sign that I've got a nice full house, and that's okay. Anyway, I'm just encouraging you to do some learning on this, because I think this is an important decision ahead of us.
Okay, any further discussion? Roll call?
Luce,
Aye.
Hadley,
Aye.
Neal,
Aye.
Olson,
Aye.
Zittergruen,
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Tax abatement, rebate discussion?
All right. So, as noted at the previous council meeting, I was asked this also be put on the agenda for update discussion, see where we're at. We do actually have a couple of projects that staff are actively working on as well. So, this is a great time for, based on council's comments during the work session of abatement, staff has been working with Dorsey Whitney, our legal counsel for TIF and bonding, on creating urban renewal areas, specifically for Skyline Motorsports, and that conversation we had in the business park. And we do have, the council has already approved the site plan of Bluffside. I was like, it's not Cliffside, but of Bluffside. And so that's another project that has the same request for consideration of tax abatement or rebate. I do believe it's a very good candidate for rebate as opposed to abatement, with a very, actually it's the same exact process as Skyline. What we are currently working on is the plan that establishes the area of just those parcels. Similar to what the city did with the urban revitalization areas in the business park, which are abatement, and that's atypical of that structure. Where it's typical with urban renewal areas with tax rebate, is under a rebate, it's all negotiated on a case-by-case basis through a development agreement. So instead of using that rebate agreement as your negotiation, the council was using tax abatement and revitalization areas and changing the rules of the revitalization area with the plan every time. Well, in theory, that was the thought. That's your negotiation tool, is to change the rules. That's very atypical. And a revitalization area, which is again abatement, you're supposed to set the rules in a specific area, and you either meet the criteria or you don't, and you get your abatement.
Like our housing. That's
Like
what
our housing.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yep.
So our housing, last amended in 2018, has the entire city limits currently as the urban revitalization area. So any new construction or improvement upon a residential property by 20%, 20 or 15, if they're eligible, 5 years tax abatement, no additional taxes based on your improvements. The way that's done is your taxable valuation is frozen. And this is where we're really getting the weeds on the difference of abatement versus rebate and revitalization area as opposed to a renewal area. So in revitalization with abatement, your taxable valuation is frozen. In a rebate, in an urban renewal area, your taxable valuation does increase based on your improvement, but you have your increment that is created above your base. So this is what I was at before, and now I have my actual taxable valuation. I am eligible for rebate of that increment. However, state law requires that all properties must still pay the debt service levies, institutional support levy, and Pebble. So it is not a true dollar for dollar. If it is an abatement of 100%, it is truly 100%. A rebate of 100% is not truly 100%. It's slightly less than that because you still have to pay those. Those are not eligible for rebate. There's commonly you hear the argument that, well, under an abatement, I'm paying taxes because they don't have to. And under abatement, there is a sliver of truth to that. And I'm talking a sliver because if I don't have to pay debt service on that additional increment, somebody else has to. And that's distributed among the rest of the community. So I just want to point that difference out, that 100% abatement is truly 100%. 100% rebate is not truly 100%. You have to less those other levies.
What was the recommendation of bond counsel?
It
What was the recommendation of bond counsel?
Bonds counsel will tell you it's all going to be based on your priorities. Ours is a community.
And we already talked about this before and said rebates were
Right.
where we wanted to go.
Correct. And so that is the path staff has been working with bond counsel. And we have yet another follow-up phone conversation because part of the plan, the renewal plans, must include the eligible projects. So, for example, Skyline Motorsports, Bluffside, for those projects, you incorporate those in your plan that we want to give grants to encourage economic development of these projects, and you set up the rebate amount, not in the plan, but through the development agreement. And that's what each one is negotiated through, is the development agreement.
So when we talk about abatement, we set it and we keep it. We don't do anything with it.
Correct.
When we start doing rebates, every time we get a request, we do it. So we don't have like, yeah, it's written into the development agreement, but we don't have a do these steps and this is what you get.
Just want to make sure I'm clear before I answer. So on the abatement side, they do have these steps and then you get it, but those are set ahead of time
Right.
by everyone. There's
Yes.
no negotiating on, okay, business A, we really want you here, so here's your terms and conditions to get you here. And business C, we don't want to negotiate a development agreement. If you want to have that kind of flexibility, you need to either do it through a development agreement or the route the council was going before, which is atypical, of actually amending the area and changing the rules for everyone within that area.
Right. No, what I'm asking is if we go the rebate route, which I hope that we do, there isn't we will enter into a development agreement with you if you blank, right?
Correct.
It's just anybody can come to us and say, we want to have a development agreement. What can we work out? Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. And I hope that's the route council wants too, because that's what I've been working with Dorsey Whitney on.
And those guidelines-
For those,
That is what we talked about the last time we talked about this.
and those
correct.
guidelines can change for each particular one that comes to us, correct?
Correct. So let's say hypothetically, well, not hypothetically, I think this was part of the presentation for, I feel bad for talking, I prepared him. I told Brent that we were going to mention this today. So Bluffside was presented as a phase 1 and a phase 2. And so the urban renewal area, should council want to do a development agreement with Bluffside on their potential development, phase 1, which is that first parcel, would be incorporated in the area and their project would be put in the plan. And let's say phase 2, it doesn't happen for another 10, 15 years. That's fine. In 10, 15 years, when we're ready to pull the trigger on phase 2, council comes back, amends the plan and the area to include the next parcel, and, negotiates another development agreement on phase 2. I'm leaving out a crucial component of this. So the state of Iowa did change the rules regarding TIF, and so there is a timer associated with these. So if you incorporate too much of an area in that doesn't have an immediate development, your timer still starts. And so if you don't capture all that increment in 20 years and you end up with a new base, let's say development happens in year 15, he's got 5 years to either collect the rebate back and get a rebate back, or we just have to start a new one and do this whole thing over again. So that's why just amend the plan to incorporate the new parcel, because it starts the timer when you get it in the area.
Makes sense.
And for example, and I'm sorry, I'm a visual person, so this is horrible for me. So I'm going to do this visually.
Mhm.
So, for example, the proposed development, which would be the Lee property, across from the hotel.
Mhm.
Was that not part of the urban revitalization district of the Bluffs in LLC?
Yes, so it was part of one in 2007. I'm looking at the screen. 'Cause
So the
Carrie,
clock
do you
is,
remember?
but the clock has not expired on this.
It
yeah?
has not expired, but it's not going to have much left to it. And so what we would do is actually create a new, they can have overlapping boundaries. We would create a new urban renewal area just as it sits, and then let that other one expire.
Why? Because it would seem to me that this would cost money.
We'd still have to amend the plan of the existing area to incorporate at least the project, even with the land being in the existing area. We would still have to amend the plan to at least incorporate the project.
And it would expire before they could develop.
Would it expire before they develop?
Potentially. I can't say for certain.
That's my, this is my concern though, right? That we enter into these districts based on comp plan or Kirk and I driving around and saying, oh, well, this half acre is available, but we could see down the road that maybe if you bought these 3 other properties, this would be a prime area for redevelopment.
Mm-hmm.
This seems like we're being reactive to this proposal based on, strictly on projects that are in the hopper.
Yes.
How do we use this tool then if we're creating districts and you say this giant district is a bad idea because then your time expires and it's project specific or whatnot? In the past, I know you say we have done this incorrectly and we've used larger districts than needed.
Yeah.
And
I don't mean to be grinning over here.
And I understand the concept of a development agreement and why that's beneficial, because then we can ask our questions or the things that we want within a development agreement, right?
Correct.
But let's just say, for example, that, and I'm going to use a piece of property that I guess will not be redeveloped, but let's just say we decided that the entire lower school campus should be an urban revitalization area because we feel that it is prime for redevelopment. There's no specific project. What tool do we use then? Is that this overlay?
So that's going to depend on, so you said revitalization, so that's abatement. So that's if we want
Okay,
to
so I used the wrong word then.
Well, I just want to make sure.
Okay.
Because revitalization, which we'll get to, we've got another member in attendance or multiple members that might be concerned on a future revitalization district where maybe the downtown district is more apt for a revitalization district, which C3 already has one, that we can amend that plan to incorporate.
But there's no development agreement within that. That's just
That
an
is correct.
overlay, and you get whatever percentage we set.
Right, so that would be if council says, council's heard conversations about the cost of installing sprinkler systems and the cost of things like that. So that is a potential district that the council could say, our revitalization plan to be eligible for an abatement is installation of fire sprinkler system and physical improvements with a cost of, doesn't necessarily need to be a valuation increase, but we can set parameters that projects that would not typically be a good fit for a renewal area with a rebate, those are the ones you want to capture with a revitalization area and abatement. So let's say again, we're just talking at this point. So let's say the school campus area, we want to redevelop it, and council says we need to place infrastructure as part of this.
Exactly.
That's the renewal area, and there's multiple models of that where it's either a rebate back to a developer that's installing all the utilities, deeding over to the city, or another method to use it is establish the renewal area over the course of it, install the utilities at the city's cost. Now, this is a bigger risk to the city, but if we can't get a developer to come in and do that, we can install the utilities at our cost, establish that renewal area, and then recover that debt we've incurred of installing the utilities.
Okay, well then I'm going to use an actual example rather than something that's far-fetched.
Mhm.
We've done the traffic study in the Nordheim edition.
Mhm.
We know that there's a potential large commercial development in Ozzyhagen relocating there, right? They're non-profit, I believe, so the taxation portion of their project may or may not be required. But we know that there's going to probably be infrastructure needed. We also know that there's a potential for housing there. We have a housing abatement program that's being used there currently in the Mossman edition. They developed that land. They put in the infrastructure themselves. We accepted that based on an engineering spec. But if we want to encourage a larger development of housing, is it better than to use a TIF overlay to help offset your infrastructure? Or do we continue down the path that we have, not really targeting an area and just hoping that the abatement organically allows growth? That's, that area and some of these other 2-mile areas for housing are where we need infrastructure, or we know that we're going to be on the hook for another road, come to my mind.
Yeah, I would say a renewal area with either a rebate back to the developer, that would be the prime situation.
But it's not both.
But it's not both. And actually, our housing revitalization plan that encompasses the whole area does have a section in it, Section M, that specifically calls out if your property is part of a development agreement with a developer and it's eligible for rebate, you're not eligible for abatement.
So, for example, that addition, we didn't participate in the infrastructure. That was done by the developer. But in trying to encourage more affordable development, does it make more sense to be a partner because of infrastructure?
So if you want to encourage the physical houses being built, that is typically your abatement. But if you're wanting to encourage additional lots for development, like just creating the actual infrastructure and lots, that is typically a renewal area with a rebate back to the developer. Because now they are seeing the incentive to build infrastructure, as opposed to, as Joe Q developer, I'm putting in the infrastructure and recovering my investment through the sale of the lots, that Joe Q homeowner has the incentive to build in because I have 5 years, 100% tax abatement.
Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the old guys in the room. Bruning addition, Downing addition, other more larger new Venium, right? Did we, was that TIF?
Those are abatements.
Venium was TIF,
Oh, the one over there.
the one up there on Locust Road. The large senior home, large senior center was used TIF. But it was contested, and then the TIF amount ended up being reduced from what it was originally proposed. But they were going to use a bunch of the tax money for the street improvements and other things, I believe. It's been a long time.
How about like
But-
Serenity
It
Court?
was TIF.
How about-
Houses built up there get abatements.
The houses are different.
Okay.
The TIF project was the first one up there, and it was the only thing up there at the time was Venium.
Okay.
All of the houses came later.
And it was done by different developers. But, so like Serenity Court, for example. What's his name's project? The turkey guy.
Oh. That may have been TIF as well. And then hang on, I'm not plugged in. That may have been TIF as well, but I can't say for certain. It's been a long time as well. But I think some of that money ended up coming back because the developer didn't do the right curb cuts on the street. I don't know that that particular project really paid off for anybody. But I think he was able to use some TIF money for the streets. Does that sound right? Correct?
Correct. That area would be part of a 2000 Mound Street Urban Renewal District.
Okay. So in that case, just and I don't know if anybody knows, but was it chicken or was it the egg? Like, did we identify that as a strategic area and create a district and encourage development? Or was it reactionary and we said, we will TIF this if you do blah, 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 and we created a development agreement?
I think the project was presented to the city, and then the TIF district was created.
That was my gut too.
And I think the same is true with Venium, but of course, that area on Locust Road has been targeted for, if you were to draw a big bubble around there, it would say housing, schools, all these other things. So whether it's reactionary or not, I think it's valuable to be able to do that.
Oh, and I don't disagree. My question is what do we as a council use as a tool for areas that we feel, based on infrastructure needs or maximizing existing infrastructure, what tool do we best use? Because that's why I feel like we've been doing what we've been doing. Even though you feel like it's wrong, it's that we've been reactionary, not proactive. And I believe this council wants to be proactive, but have the right tool to enter into a correct agreement.
When I think about being proactive, that would be the business park, right? I mean, we built infrastructure up there so that people would come and build businesses up there, and
But we didn't do that. That was jobs.
right, but there wasn't a developer approaching there to do it, right? Jobs said, hey, this is where businesses should come. You should build this infrastructure. We said, we'll build this infrastructure. People should come. I feel like that isn't working. So I don't like the reactionary language, only because it's I much prefer the opportunistic. Like, if there's an opportunity, we can work with it.
And
And
that's what the development agreement does.
One other
Yeah.
project that comes to mind that I think might have also been TIF, and maybe two projects, were at around the same time, housing. I think the Woolen Mill project may have been a TIF project.
There was at least the
And possibly also the the senior housing down by the east side on Washington, Washington Courts. I believe those two may have both been TIF to a small extent.
So do you mean
They aren't
they were
huge
created
projects.
and then a developer came and said, because you've done this, I'm going to do this?
No, I think that the developer saw an opportunity in an appropriate area to bring it to our attention that if we use TIF, we can improve this property and make, low-income housing possible in
Right,
this
but I
area.
feel like what Ross is asking, have we ever just created an area so that a developer would come in and say, hey, I'm going to do this area?
Well, I think in some cases we have made larger circles around areas that are prime for development based on one project in part of that area. I think if you were to look possibly at Mechanic Street and the area out by the old Bluffs Inn and or Marriott Fairfield, that may have been a much larger area at some point, I think.
If I may just take 3 steps back, this is just an item for conversation, it seems like, and I know staff wanted, or maybe didn't want input, but certainly would welcome input. I'm grateful for the process that you all are undertaking. I think it sounds like we can accomplish, maybe in a different way, all of our goals. I feel like you've heard council priorities established with regard to what kinds of things we want to use the various incentives at our disposal to incentivize, whether it's rebates or abatements. And I guess I feel like you're on the right track with it. And it doesn't seem to me that if we continue to proceed with this sort of rebate-focused approach that you're pursuing, that takes any arrows out of our quiver. That if there's something that comes up down the road that we want to do an abatement for, to get infrastructure on the ground or something, that's possible down the road. So I think that this is the appropriate posture and mix, and I'm grateful for the update on the progress towards it, because I know what I don't think is representative of the council's priorities, and that's the status quo with regard to abating the entire value of $500,000 homes that may have been built without the abatement.
Well, and that's
so I'm glad
actually what
we're-
I want to go with, because I feel like we're talking about development, but then these individual homes, I do think, like, I appreciate this move to rebate, but I really do want to look at the abatement side of what we're offering and change those rules.
And I would encourage council to also take a look at that as part of their conversations with TIF council. I did ask a question how the city of Decorah has been able to establish a district around the entire city limits that is eligible on the residential side for 5 years on the full 100% of the assessed value. The reason I asked that is reserved for blighted areas.
Right.
So there is some, while there is no hard and fast determination on what constitutes a slum and blight area of part of this revitalization plan, we'd have to make that argument, though, that why the city of Decorah as a whole is slum and blight.
But I don't think we-
I want to go on record as not wanting to make that argument.
I don't either. I think we want to end that. I think we've been pretty clear about that.
So I am pointing out that for that exact case, that is how Decorah is doing a 5-year at 100%. We don't need to go into closed session for pending litigation, right?
We didn't, I mean, this is a different council than voted on
but
that, I think, to be clear.
What I'm getting at is, what may be a better suit for Decorah is, even if is across the entire city limits, 3 years, 100% of the first 75,000 of appraised value. That is no slum and blight designation. That is the max you can do without that slum and blight.
And that's state code?
That's state code.
Okay.
So we could change that today.
Well, we'd
Well,
have to go through.
we could change that this summer.
Right. So that's
Yeah.
something I also wanted to point out to council, that I know that housing one's been a topic of conversation. I would strongly encourage council look at 3-year, 100% on the first 75,000.
I like that.
I think that's good, but I think we have to be wary and aware of the reality that there's probably a lot of houses that have been built in Decorah in the past 5 years that wouldn't have been built if that was the entirety of the incentive scheme in place. And I feel like it's a good thing that some of the earlier houses that participate in that are starting to roll onto our tax rolls. Like you see them coming on and you see the effect on our property tax. So I guess what I'm saying is I'd welcome that move, but I'd want it to be part of a sort of robust and comprehensive look at, like, are there other things we can be doing via rebate to continue to incentivize the building of housing? Now, I personally am not, I think it should go more than 75,000. I don't think, obviously, we should be looking to match the largesse of prior council's decisions.
I think part of that is solved by, essentially what we're doing is we're encouraging developers to buy houses. I think we can look at the Decorah housing or to build houses, sorry. I think we can look at Decorah's housing market to suggest that people are going to buy houses that are built. And they're probably not looking at whether or not they're going to pay taxes on them, right? So if we're using our rebates appropriately, we should still have developers wanting to build. They're going to get a rebate, right? And then we know we have the demand for people to buy houses.
I had a question from a constituent. If we as a council were considering an owner-occupied requirement in our abatements to encourage homeownership.
So I have asked Travis to look at what we can do for that. I feel like that's a whole nother discussion. Or can we have that discussion now?
Certainly can.
I would love to have an owner-occupied.
They provided me with an example of code from another city that indicated that tax incentives for that city were it was either, if it was single family, it was owner occupied, and if it was a multifamily, it was a percentage of the unit be owner occupied, just to allow them to live within the development as well, or requiring them to live within the development as well.
I'd like to
Is
maybe
that something-
tag long-term rental onto that list. I think that there's a lot of people in Decorah who rent their houses who are wonderful. They send their kids to schools and they shop at our stores, and they're wonderful parts of our community. I was a house renter here for 4 years, and I would hate, for someone to be disincentivized from building a house for rental purposes. I think what we're trying to avoid is short-term rentals, incentivizing that. Is that accurate?
No, I think what Ross maybe is suggesting, is that, let's say someone buys a house and then renovates it, right? They're not subject, if they're renovating it to make it into a short-term rental, they aren't subject to tax abatement. Is that what you're suggesting?
I was passing on a comment.
Yeah.
I didn't have a basis for it, other than wondering, this ordinance that they provided was not in the state of Iowa. My question was, is this something within the state of Iowa that is within what you've been discussing with bond counsel? Is an owner-occupied restriction or contingency possible within our code?
So, I believe so, yes. Enforcement might become an issue because it would take a certification on their part to show that as part of an abatement is a one-off. You apply for it once, you're granted, a letter goes off to the assessor, and they apply that abatement structure. So that's not to say that, because I did this personally when I lived in North Liberty. I had a condo, resided there for several years, got my first job in Kansas, did not anticipate staying in Kansas, and so I kept ownership of my condo and rented it out, sublet it out. And so the enforcement and monitoring that condo or that home that was built and now owner occupied maintains it for any extended period of time is going to be tough. What I think John might be looking up right now is to Stephen's comment on long-term versus short-term housing.
So thinking of that enforcement, could you, rather than make it an automatic 3-year renewal, that they actually had to renew, they could renew for 3 years, but they had to actually apply every year? So that you could then, so maybe the first year they lived in it and the second year they didn't, they wouldn't get their abatement when they don't live in it.
I've got another follow-up phone call with Dorsey Whitney on Friday. I'll touch base on that one.
Okay.
From the staff, I mean, we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, and there's
from-
there is another subject on abatement that I would like, but John, did you pull up short-term versus long-term?
This goes back to when we tried to regulate short-term rental units, and then the Iowa legislature changed the law. And so I think that would apply, and that's basically you can't differentiate in enforcement between short-term and long-term. You can have rules and regulations, but they basically have to be the same. And then for short-term, there's some other non-applicable limitations that wouldn't apply to this discussion. But
You can't differentiate in enforcement, but I guess my question is, can you differentiate in terms of what you incentivize with rebates or
well,
incentives?
the statute says talks about ordinances have to be enforced in the same manner as enforcement applicable to similar properties that are not short-term rental properties. So it makes me think you cannot be differentiating, or at least we need to look at that closely further, that you couldn't incentivize long-term and not short-term.
And urban renewal.
To establish for one, you have to say.
Right, right.
But we could incentivize owner-occupied, no rental of any kind.
Correct, but not between long-term rental, short-term rental.
Right.
Because a urban renewal plan is an ordinance.
Can you, this is not in this necessary abatement discussion, but I really want to know, can you have a different tax structure for owner-occupied houses than you do for not owner-occupied?
So for example, the two projects that Kirk brought up, Woolen Mill and Washington.
So, it's been a long time, whether they had TIF or not, I don't actually recall.
Right, but
I'm
they
just
were,
suggesting they might have.
but they were worthy projects.
Yes.
That the city felt were needed in a target market
And
that you wanted to
we did
support.
participate in one way or the other. I mean, I know that we supported both of those projects financially. I just seem to remember it was TIF, but it could have been tax abatement too.
But we look at our housing study, right, and we see, okay, demographic X has a shortfall of 225 units. And maybe that's a month-to-month lease, which would be considered a short-term rental, yeah? Right.
I think
So
it's less than 30, right?
Yeah.
it's just very frustrating to me that I don't feel like there's a simple solution to say the city of Decorah wants to add 225 units of low to moderate income senior citizen housing, and we want to put it here without actually owning the land and just designating it to ourselves. Is that right?
That's correct. If there were a silver bullet, that person would make a lot of money selling it to communities like Decorah.
Okay.
So you had brought up a question, Ross, about picking an area and establishing an urban renewal and say, we want to incentivize this. This is a parcel we've identified. It's part of the comprehensive plan. We want you to go here. The council could establish an urban renewal area and a plan associated with it to kind of start the conversation, let's call it. The timer starts when that project happens. So if we spell out, the city of Decorah, in partnership with Venahem or whoever owns that area, is agreeing to rebate back the cost of public infrastructure at 100%, and spell out the project of must create at least X number of housing units, and we can go ahead and do all that. And the 20-year timer does not start until that project happens. So
That project happens in planning, that project happens in a memorandum of understanding, that project happens in shovel in the ground.
Shovel in the ground and on the tax roll. Tax roll is the trigger.
So completion and occupancy certificate.
Technically, they wouldn't even have to have an occupancy, but yes, tax roll. Whenever we certify,
that's when the ticker starts.
correct. It's when we certify debt. So if we've either put the infrastructure in the ground and we're holding off until somebody comes in, because let's say we build it out. We build it out and we're waiting for Joe Q developer to come in and say, all right, I've got, I want to buy all these houses and put, there's different models of this. Grinnell's got a unique setup of, they're not tiny homes by any means, but they're 2-bedroom, 2-bath, smaller, more modest, post-World War II type era homes. Much smaller footprint. You can put them in a lot denser, but you typically find them in their own cluster. So let's say out there we want to do some kind of project like this. We can put that project in our urban renewal plan. We can go ahead and put in infrastructure and have it ready to go. And as soon as we certify debt, that's the technical term for the trigger, but we don't certify debt until there is taxable valuation about to come in. Because otherwise you certify your debt and you've got no revenue, your 20-year timer starts, and now you've limited your potential revenue.
So I know, I'm sorry, I'm asking too many questions.
Well, I appreciate the council's eyes not glazing over, so
Okay,
I think.
So Stephen and Steve and I, over beer that we paid for ourselves, have had conversations adverse to new infrastructure because of long-term costs and whatnot, happy to build a new road, right? So we have different viewpoints as far as what we would do.
Mhm.
When you say certified debt, let's just go back to the Venium property again. Based on a traffic study, we know that in all likelihood we would need another ingress-egress road.
Mhm.
Both models over $1 million. We wouldn't be building these roads unless we had something solid to go on. What does certified debt mean?
Mhm. So a couple things. We could pay it with cash, not that we're flush with cash and have $1 million to throw at a project, but through proper planning, we could do what's called an inter-fund loan. That these are funds that are actually part of, don't have a heart attack over here, but water department, wastewater department, we can pull whatever cash available we have and call it an inter-fund loan with terms of repayment of, fluid. It's our own money. We set the terms of what that repayment back to those departments look like. We can even charge interest to those departments. When we have to start paying that back, and we can, again, those terms are fluid, we're the loan. The moment we have to either start paying loans back, or if it's a rebate, so if I'm Joe Q developer and I put in the infrastructure for you, I, as Joe Q developer, can say, all right, our development agreement says you're going to rebate back me the portion of taxes, rebate them back. Well, Joe Q developer's not going to certify or come to the city and say, you need to start repaying me until right before he builds that first house. Because otherwise he starts his clock premature too.
Okay, thank you.
So that's
That was the clarifying trigger that I
incurring
needed to
debt
hear.
is now I've got a development agreement with you, but you haven't started the timer, and you won't start that timer until right before that first project hits the ground.
This sounds like the Field of Dreams discussion, like if you build it, they will come.
This is an entire semester of master
Yeah, I was
programming.
gonna say,
Yeah.
Do you need
Hey, would it
specific
be
discussion?
just-
Sorry, go ahead, Mayor. I was just gonna
Yeah,
ask about
it was-
Bluffside Gardens. Do you need specific discussion on that?
So at least not necessarily specific discussion, but if council were to say, no, we don't think that's an eligible project, now would be a good time to say that so staff doesn't work with the developer, and the developer can have those realistic expectations that, hey, I'm not going to see anything from the city development standpoint. So is anybody a hard no on this one?
I think that to the extent that the business model is in pretty direct competition with Airbnbs, it will have a fairly direct relationship to our greatest need, which is more housing. So I personally think it's an appropriate target for incentivization.
Okay.
no,
Well,
I
no
don't-
motion needed.
You can't do any
Yep.
motions.
And
But
so,
on something like this, I would rather say, because we've seen the site plan, and we know that we're not having infrastructure, we believe that we are not having an infrastructure load on this project. Can we have a business development agreement and say, we believe that the overall value of this development should be X on the books
Yep.
to receive X.
Yep. So they will have, in working with the developer, will have an idea of what their assessed value is going to be, which is slightly different than taxable value. But the development agreement will include, here is the minimum assessed valuation that you are agreeing to as part of this development agreement. And of that assessed valuation, we will rebate back this scale to you. And it will have terms like you must build out in the next 2-3 years. You will certify that you had true costs of X value. Those are all part of the development agreement.
And that we will not be taking this road on as a public property.
We can go to that and specify that the roads,
Drainage,
driveways, all of that
stormwater.
within the existing boundaries are all private ownership. Yes, we can specify that.
Would it stand to reason to continue this discussion and work session on the?
Yeah, there is one more I do want to do some clarification
Okay.
on. The C3 business district, the council's definitely, majority of councils talked about the downtown as, a, I don't know, best term I want to use, but definitely an area of emphasis of the majority of council. And so, in looking at the C3 urban revitalization area, which is currently on the books, revitalization, that is an abatement, and this is one where I would recommend keeping a revitalization area an abatement method, because, and I'm not trying to sound disrespectful by this comment, but it's already an existing property 9 times out of 10 that already has value and
And infrastructure.
infrastructure, but it's already improvements to these properties are typically not going to create a significant increase in value, because a lot of it is interior work, is installation. They are high cost, do not get me wrong, and they are high value, but the purely taxable consideration, they do not generate enough increment to offset the legal costs with a development agreement. And each individual one of them would have to negotiate a development agreement. So instead, you set an abatement with a revitalization area that says, if you stick $50,000 into your downtown building, improving the use, creating additional housing units, however council wants to structure it, installation, bringing them up to modern day code requirements, the city can abate your additional tax created. Now again, it's not going to have the same, let's use the number 200,000. You still can't build a single family home for $200,000, not very easily. The $200,000 in cost to improve a building downtown is not going to yield the same dollar for dollar in appraised value. And I'm using that term deliberately because their appraised value, it's not a dollar for dollar return construction for appraised value.
So how are we then, how are we incentivizing folks to do it? Because they're not getting a cost-effective cash out, right? I mean, so if they put $500,000 into their building, $300,000 in their building, and they're only getting an abatement of $100 because that's how much their taxes went up, that seems like it's not doing what we wanted to do, which is encouraging people to invest in their downtown building. Are there other tools, or that's just the way it is?
Our hands are going to be pretty tight. We can create additional. Okay, so this would be, I don't want to call it going outside the box.
Well, we like that.
This would the city be taking on some risk, but we did this in Humboldt. I've seen it replicated elsewhere. The city could establish, and we already do have an urban renewal area near there that Fairway is part of. Yes, there is an urban, or we could start over, start fresh, create a new urban renewal area. But what we would have to do is take a look if the current one has enough increment, or excuse me, has enough time left, because that changed in state legislation 3 years ago now, I think, 2 or 3, set a 20-year start time for everyone. Then, even those that had no sunset, timer starts today. So if there's still time there and that base is still set, that there's enough increment in that district, we would actually want to amend that urban renewal area and that urban renewal plan to still capture that existing base, or excuse me, that existing infrastructure, if there's value there. Otherwise, let's act like we start off new. We establish new urban renewal area. We can borrow funds, and that doesn't have to be from buying bonds, that doesn't have to be a commercial loan. Again, could be an inter-fund loan, but we can create an economic development grant that said, here is X $1,000 you can apply for as part of this district for improvements. Now, these I would strongly recommend that they must be on the exterior of a property, because the whole premise is
It's your facade improvement and project
it's your facade improvement program.
to raise the value of your C3.
Correct. Now you've raised the value of the C3, which again, dollar for dollar it's not a true dollar for dollar return. 10,000 in is not going to be a $10,000 increase in assessed valuation. So over 20 years, we'd have to do the math and see what is that dollar amount that the city could anticipate capturing in 20 years and structure a loan to repay off that revenue. Thank you all for following along.
I guess maybe I'll go back to staff. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion. How would you like to
So on the
proceed
C3,
with it?
so I believe we've got, the two Skyline Motorsports, Bluffside. We've got enough to get going. Again, next meeting will be more particulars, development agreement discussion. Next meeting or maybe subsequent meetings, but C3, are there specific criteria? Because I do believe that the revitalization plan with an abatement is the best method for the downtown district for at least interior improvements without creating and incurring additional debt to create an economic development grant.
For me, the addition of housing is, I guess, one. And then you mentioned sprinklers. I know that that's a tremendous financial burden on, I guess ADA accessibility improvements would be something that I think we should encourage with our incentives. I don't know. Those are three that seem like expensive and of value to the city in one way or another. We all don't have to look that far from Decorah to see what happened in Waukon recently to know how important it is that our downtown be sprinklerized where possible. So those are the three big ones for me.
What was the first one?
I think I said adding housing.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Gotcha.
And then sprinklers, and then and Travis, I'm curious, or maybe others on the council, like, what about adding housing or improving the housing stock? Does that make sense? Like, I've been in upstairs apartments along Water Street that seem less than safe, and I feel like we could maybe just enhance the housing stock too, as a way of, there'd be more value there than in other investments
But
in
we
the
can't
building.
put a requirement that they're not be used for Airbnb, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Do we have, there's a certain part of, after this discussion, right, no matter what they do to their building, they're not really actually getting that big of an abatement, correct? Because their taxes aren't going to go up that much.
Not
So
that
it
much.
seems to me that we don't need to put that many restrictions on them. We want people to invest in their downtown building, whether it's changing windows, new paint, putting in sprinklers. So if we make the list, that's all they could get it for, right?
If you make as part of that revitalization plan, you must use it for X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then, or that you must include. It wouldn't be. Excuse me. It wouldn't be that you'd have to use it for that, because you're not getting anything per se as much as you're just foregoing those property taxes you'll have to pay. So to say your project must include X, Y, Z to be eligible for the tax abate is the way that would be structured.
I guess I'm for a less restrictive tax abatement for downtown buildings.
Yeah, no, I think that's
tuck pointing,
clarifying.
It's awesome.
What she said, yeah. Is there a certain dollar amount minimum that we should require? I mean, otherwise you're talking about, I don't want someone coming to us every time they repaint.
Add a bathroom,
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
I would recommend setting some kind of basement dollar amount.
Do you have a recommendation?
I mean, off the top of my head, I would say 20,000 maybe. I don't think that's too much to ask for, if because it still does take staff time, and I don't want to say staff time's worth $20,000, but again, you add a bathroom to an existing building, you're going to be looking at $10,000. It's not going to do anything for your taxable valuation, but I think 20,000 maybe.
Right, but,
So is the
but
tax
what would they
abatement
be,
really
what would they get abated then? If it doesn't do anything for your taxable valuation, what is it that we're abating?
That's what I'm getting at is, if you're not making substantial improvements to the
Yeah.
building,
Yeah, you're not getting any.
yeah, you're not getting anything, but we are still going through the abatement process with
Exactly.
you.
So I think 20 makes sense. Because your taxes should change with that.
That's fine with me.
Okay,
Okay,
I think that kind of covers what I really wanted to get discussed.
okay.
Any
Time
other
for s-
questions, thoughts from council?
Isn't it time for scooters?
Okay.
Talk about scooters.
All right.
All right, we'll go on to the next one. You can figure out if you want to do more out of work session or not. Okay, bird scooter discussion.
Okay, so I did have council members per rules and procedures. Council members reach out to me, asked that this be placed on the agenda for discussion, and did reach out to Bird Scooter, our business rep, and did hand out an email I received at 4 o'clock. I did receive an email last week when I reached out to her on attending. She did make it known at that time that they have, she had a scheduling conflict. I'm gonna look up real quick. I don't see her on there, but she had a scheduling conflict, another council meeting that she had to participate in. She was gonna try and find somebody else within her office to attend, could not do so. So I did distribute an email.
Hey, Travis, we do have two representatives here.
Oh,
Not really a representative.
I shouldn't say that, but
I work for them.
gotcha.
just
Gotcha.
just for an information.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you. Kylie's been our point of contact with Bird, the company, for as our business representative. She did send out an email apologizing that she wasn't able to attend tonight. Would appreciate if we can set up a later meeting, separate discussion. With not able to attend, she did want to provide some numbers since launching in Decorah. Total number of rides, 1,618. Total users, riders are 555. Total miles traveled are 2,455. And metric tons of carbon dioxide saved are 0.35.
Does she have the average age of the rider?
She does not. So that I knew, based on some of the feedback from council members, I said, well, here's what's going to be brought up. I know this, so be ready for this. Age of rider, the MOU says that the bird scooter riders will be 18 years old or older. So we are seeing locally riders less than 18 years old. So that's part of, she somewhat addresses that in the email, that they're doing a targeted message within the app specifically related to underage riding, should be live within the week, and wanted to reshare the ways to report a bird issue by using those two methods, the community mode on the app or online through their submittal. And then, let's see, The other issue talked about is just confirming with the geofencing what those requirements were, what is turned on. And so the current operational zone for scooters is the Decorah city limits, which we actually had a conversation at the staff level this morning, which actually might allude to why some scooters are being left on the trail, because some users are probably hitting that limit, the city limits, and the scooter slows down to 1 mile an hour and beeps like crazy, is my understanding. And so
Or they run out
they're
of gas.
apparently just
Yeah.
abandoning them there.
They run out of gas too.
Yeah, I've seen them in the city on the bike trail and stuff like that
Mhm.
as well, so.
Yeah.
A lot.
Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, because I've seen a lot, well, on my little map, right, you can see them, a lot of them are just they're out of energy, they need to be charged.
So as part of the MOU, Bird Scooter gives us, I have a login to see like their back end summary type data. It also does give on the each individual scooter, like their status and things like that. Again, no user data, nothing, just aggregate information.
Yep.
So
Which file is the heat map?
okay, so actually, can somebody at the staff table run? I actually left it on the printer in the office there. You don't have to run, but could you walk? Oh, we
Did you
learned
wanna
this.
get a
We
scooter?
learned this in public safety. Greg, will you please go get? Because other one, everyone just stands there and looks. But yeah, so there is a heat map that shows where rides start, where rides end. The one that she referenced and provides is, I believe, the start.
While we're waiting on Greg to come back, I talked to the, Chief Dave before the meeting about enforcement. I feel like you can divide the complaints that we as council members have received about the scooters mostly into two pots. One is violations of the rules, and two is sort of scooters being left in inappropriate places. And I think that the violation of the rules piece is one that I thought that my conversation with Dave was illuminative for me, so as long as the mayor's okay with it, I'd like him to outline his kind of vision for how enforcement was going to proceed. Is that okay, Mayor, if we hear from the chief on that?
I don't like the characteristic of two complaints. I feel like I might be the bird scooter complaint queen, like I think everyone writes to me. I'd also add injury to that.
Well, leaving where they're at, in people's yards, on the sidewalks, where even people with their handicap issues can't get through. Who's responsible for picking those up?
There.
These guys
So-
can answer.
If there are individual, so that's part of the ridership app. Obviously, you've got to put contact information. You've got to have information about you as the user. So if those are reported, Bird is supposed to be able to pull who that last user was. And as part of the app, again, this frame does not do well on two wheels. I have not used a scooter, but my understanding is as you park it, to end your ride, you have to take a picture of where and how you parked it.
I've used them. You can just leave them where they are.
But you want to step up to the microphone, please?
Yes, people do have to take a picture, but some find a way to get around that so that they can leave it and deliberately put them in places. So what we've done to get rid of that, or try to get rid of that, is we've actually communicated with Bird themselves. And at the beginning, we did have people who were parking them in front of people's houses deliberately, that we did get them banned. So that is our goal, and we've kind of do our own little investigation into these things. The biggest problem with all of that being parked in places is the communication-wise. Bird has an interface that is, like, for us, just tells us where they're at. It tells us the percentage of where they're at. It doesn't tell us exactly where they're parked or anything like that, especially if they don't properly do a picture correctly. But on the other thing with that is when we do get pictures of people where they park them, we find that people deliberately will move these scooters after, like, while they're locked. So they'll deliberately push them over, move them into people's sidewalks and all that kind of stuff. So it's harder for us to monitor that. So that's like the big issue with people parking them in people's yards and stuff like that, or putting them in the middle of the sidewalk. We've had a lot of times where people parked them on the trail where they pushed them into the bushes and or either run over our scooters and all that kind of stuff. So like it's a big issue with mainly just the people not wanting them here, I would say, is that people are deliberately making it difficult for you guys to like make a decision on this because they're putting them in these places. And the communication part is like with Bird is like, I mean, I have a discussion that I wanted to discuss with you guys about an alternative to this, a way better doing it more locally. Me and an honest partner have been talking to different different type of ride company where they deliver new scooters to you, and you create your own company, you create your own rules, you create your own interface, and you have a better communication. So like you get to do mainly whatever you want, because Bird has they say that you have, like you go in and you want to report something. They say you have the reporting. That doesn't come back to me. It doesn't come back to my fleet manager very often. So it's harder for us to understand what's wrong and what needs to change because we're not getting that information, and that's mainly up with Bird. So what we want to do with my partner and I, we have investors to buy scooters and buy bicycles too, electrical bicycles, so that we can create our own rules, create it a lot easier. We'll set up bicycle racks and then just create a better interface for people to rent the scooters, better monitoring, better ways to let us know what's wrong when we have to pick it up. And we already have many prospects coming out of that. And another thing with the scooters is we'll get new scooters. We won't get refurbished scooters that were told to us that they're refurbished, but are broken. I mean, when we first got into this, 10% of our fleet was broken.
Are you connected with Bird Scooters then?
I am a worker. I work for
Could you
the fleet
state
manager.
your name, please?
I'm August Greenberg.
Okay. Can you spell it too? I know I've got somebody that's taking minutes.
It's August as in the month, August.
Yes.
And last name Greenberg, Greenberg.
Thank you.
Thank you, August. And thank you for coming to talk with us. I think we've got two issues, though. We first have to figure out our relationship with Bird, and then we would need to entertain if we wanted to do something else. So I feel like we need to concentrate on our current agreement with Bird before we can entertain that next step. Because I agree that many of the problems could be solved by, like, docking stations would be great, or, things along those lines. It's just that that's not our current contract that we have, and I'd like to talk about the current contract we have.
Sorry. I was just
I
stating.
want to point out, it might sound like semantics, but it's not a contract.
So,
Just wanna
sorry,
be
memorandum
clear.
agreement.
Right.
Not a contract.
I think a hard part too is like, who do you call? And if you call an 800 number,
Well, it
It
sounds
doesn't
like we can
work.
call August. August, what's your number? If you're the contractor for Bird, if I have a scooter in front of my house,
I'm just the picker-upper charger.
Right.
And then
you're the
repairman.
picker-upper charger. What's your number? You're our local point of contact.
Do you want my number?
Yeah.
I mean, I can go and create a different. As much as I want to set up my personal phone number with this,
We know,
I
like, we're
don't
asking.
want
I
so many
feel like
phone
my
calls. I can
personal
set
number
up. I can
is
set
the
up a
Bird scooter
different
number.
point of contact for you
Yeah.
guys, so that would work out. But
I get a call every time one's in the wrong place. I figure you might as well.
There
no,
are-
I'm just joking a little
Yeah,
bit.
you Paul.
I've had a number of complaints from people that
Hi, Paul.
have said that they've called the Bird number and they get put on hold for 45 minutes, so they can't register their complaint or whatever's going on with it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem to be fruitful that they're getting anywhere going through Bird itself.
and that's the problem. Bird is based out of Texas, It's not local, and
I feel
as
like
I'm saying is with our new idea, it's going to be more local and more based upon, like, if you call us, we'll answer you immediately. Like, that's the plan, and that's our objective with this new company.
So
that
I
we
feel
want.
like you're advocating for us to end our memorandum of understanding with Bird and try
I
something
work
new.
for Bird, but there are a lot of things wrong. There's a lot of things that can be fixed. The company needs, I mean, if you look up bird drama, you can look up bird drama and find some bird drama.
We know.
And so, so with that, anything with the scooters, I mean, the best thing about them is, like, the scooters have actually made a huge impact on people, and I've heard from them, like, every time I ride around picking them up or putting them back, I've heard people say, you know, they were able to go get groceries. They were able to, you know, go from point A to point B in a matter of time if they're late. They were able to go to work and back. They were able to, like, one person came up to me and told me that their car broke down, and they went to a scooter and drove it to work and weren't late for work because they knew it was there. And before Bird, I know there wasn't, I'm fairly new to Decorah. I've been here for about a year now, but I've noticed that there is no really daytime, like, reasonable, affordable type of transportation that Decorah has. So the big objective with them was to do that, but also do it energy efficient. And that's what people appreciated more often than all these complaints that I've heard. I've heard more praise than most complaints, especially being out in the public, especially with the fair in the last weekend. People praised us for putting them out in the fairgrounds to drive home after the fair, or drive to their car that's parked a million miles away, or, you know, drive home. We've had people where we tried to pick it up from their lawn, but they were like, no, we intentionally left these here so that we can go to the fair. So as much as it seems like it's a big, like, a lot of complaints and everything like that, there's hundreds of people that come to us up daily. Even the people that can't ride them come up to us and tell us that they appreciate what we're doing, because what we're doing is giving that people that reasonable way of traffic to go
if
anywhere.
I can piggyback on that comment, I appreciate that. If I can piggyback on that comment, you know, another use that I've enjoyed a couple times when I've had the occasion to use it is, you all know I like to ride my bike, and I think we all know that that's right in keeping with the council's sustainability, land use, and transportation goals to get alternative mode use. Well, there are times where, like, I'm like, I should get on my bike. It's probably the best thing for me, for the city, for my pocketbook, for exercise, for global warming. But I really don't like to be sweaty when I get somewhere. Having access to a Bird scooter, which has almost all of the same positive externalities, without having to end up, you know, looking like I've run a 5K when I arrive where I'm going, has really, you know, it's been kind of nice to have a couple times. So, like, I think personally, there has been some hiccups. There's been some hardships at the start of this thing. I get frustrated, especially to hear about the sabotage that August is describing to us. I'm not surprised by that, given the level of vitriol and sort of prejudgment that you know, I was made aware of prior to these things even landing. But I think it would be premature to end the experiment, and that's, you know, partially why I wanted to hear from the chief, who told me, look, he's got this plan for a, you know, sort of measured, step-by-step enforcement. You know, he didn't want to necessarily go out and punish a bunch of, you know, put something on the record of a bunch of, you know, 17-year-olds or whatever for 16-year-old, 15, I don't know what the age limits are, but, you know, he wanted to educate first. And they've been doing that in public social media posts and in newspaper posts. I assume, you know, direct engagements occasionally happen as well. If I see these laws being broken, I'm sure the police see them being broken as well. And I think it'd be premature to end this experiment without giving our law enforcement and our community time to learn the rules and to better obey the rules. That said, the issue of scooters on our sidewalks is something that I wanted to see happen, because I'm like, how bad could 50 scooters be just sort of You know, they're not that big. They don't take up nearly as much room as the cars that they're likely replacing. However, you know, I don't love it. I kind of am with Councilmember Neal that maybe it would have been cooler to work with a company that had docks. That solves a lot of those issues. I guess what I'm saying is I feel like it's too early to count the votes on this one, and we still have something to learn as a community.
Why don't we
Yes,
how about if
go
we
ahead.
take some input from Dave? I think he was
Right.
going to provide some input.
Yep.
Thank you, August.
I've got a different outlook than August does. I know he said he's had a lot of positive feedback from the community. I've had zero. I'm contacted almost daily by the public. I pulled stats for the first 3 weeks that they were in existence. In 3-week time period, I had 15 call for services. That doesn't include anytime somebody's called up and said, there's a scooter in my yard, and the dispatcher says, call Bird. I don't think they pull a stat for that. If somebody calls up and says, there's a scooter blocking a sidewalk, and the dispatcher at night says, call Bird, I don't think we get a stat for that. But I do have stats for 3 weeks, and it's for 15 calls, all complaints. Complaints of method of operation, complaints of it's in my yard, and complaints of it's blocking a sidewalk.
Any accidents?
One young lady ended up in the emergency room from an accident.
Self-inflicted fall?
Yeah.
Well, actually, it was a pothole on our street, but yes.
It wasn't a motor vehicle or something like that. It was a rider and an incident.
I appreciate what you've said, Chief. Most of the things that come up on our agenda, you hear both sides. You know, people, some are for it, some are against it. Again, like Chief Smutzler, I've heard zero positive things from it. I probably heard at least 40 or 50 complaints. I witnessed a number of issues myself, people riding on sidewalks. Most people that pass you on the bike trail on a bicycle know the rules to at least ding their bell or give you a heads up they're coming by. The scooter people, I've noticed very few of them give you a heads up, or if any of them do. Again, the part where they've been stranded, you know, numerous places around sidewalks, against people's fences, things like that. Again, like I said, I've heard zero positive things. Everything's been negative. I'd be curious to hear what other council people have heard from different constituents they've talked with in reference to them.
So I got the incident on the 14-year-old. A woman had one parked in her yard, an elderly woman, tried to move it because it was blocking her stairs, and then it kind of, she hit her ankle with it, so she sent me a picture. I'm happy to forward it.
Oh,
Okay, good. Okay. I guess, I mean, I have numerous concerns, and I asked a question at the beginning. So actually, I have a lot of questions for you, right? I mean, we signed a memorandum of understanding that said something about our streets and the conditions of our streets. I think about the 14-year-old who, luckily the mom acknowledged that she signed a waiver illegally. Having worked for camps and having parents sign waivers all the time about liability issues, I know that they're about as worth what their paper is worth. So I guess I have concerns about when we signed this memorandum of agreement, it seemed to me that we do have some culpability and liability if our streets have potholes in them that we knowingly have not fixed, or
I mean, you're going to have those regardless of whether you have the memorandum of understanding. I don't see what the MOU gains us necessarily. I mean, there's an indemnification agreement in there. To me, that I have questions about that indemnification agreement because it's probably got some limitations on there maybe we wouldn't otherwise have. On the other hand, it at least provides that they're going to carry a certain amount of insurance, and it has some other things we wouldn't necessarily be assured of. Maybe they have that anyways.
Hours of operate.
The hours of operation.
so we can put confinements, or we can put
Yeah.
constrictions on it without it, and without it they could just be here, right?
Right. So I mean, there's some benefits there. However, you could pass an ordinance too. You know, and you've had some time, and maybe you want some more to see how this stuff works and the way that you'd like to see them used. I would encourage you to consider an ordinance as opposed to a memorandum of understanding. I don't know, maybe Bird does these MOUs as a way of gauging public input. They don't want to go a place they're not invited.
Right, and that's one of the other benefits I'd point out on the MOU. Our city code is silent when it comes to scooters and e-scooters. And so the MOU says Decorah, or excuse me, Bird Scooters will hold their riders to our bicycle requirements, because all of our sections of code, like not allowed to be on sidewalks downtown and must stop at stops, all of that is very specific to bicycles. Doesn't mention scooter at all.
So
Because it even goes to define bicycle as 2 wheels with a saddle.
Yes, and that's better than nothing, but at the same time, that's an agreement between us and Bird.
Right.
You know, the city doesn't have an individual agreement with every rider that's out there.
I do like the idea of an ordinance regarding scooters, because we
Correct.
do have private scooters too.
Because
and-
especially if we have other conversation going on about private development of scooters and
Exactly.
bicycle
So
system.
an ordinance would be great related to
Hey, when
scooters.
is that, how long do they go for in the fall?
Yeah, the MOU runs till December. It's got an auto renewal. To John's point, I do want to point out, I think the MOU is an interest piece where, as pointed out to Bird before even brought to council, they don't need one to operate in the city of Decorah. And so the MOU is for, basically, if council were to say, according to Bird, if the council withdraws from the MOU, requires 30-day notice, according to Bird, they will then take that as their hint and get out of town. Do they have to? The answer is no.
But then we could create an ordinance.
And we could create an ordinance, yes. And that's how we would have to put those requirements in place.
Do you,
A
do you
couple other
see,
things I wanted to point out that I heard that I think are important to the conversation. And one is that they've been on Highway 9, right? So there were Bird scooters on Highway 9. People riding out to Walmart, not on the bike trail, but actually on the highway. I talked with officers today, 4 officers, and the chief, who expressed multiple concerns about safety. And I saw 2
Haven't
flying
he headed
by
up
my
the
street.
hill to toppling Goliath? I'm curious. I thought that might be a problem.
They go. What I
not-
heard,
Or are they
Not run across it.
prohibited?
Mr. Carpets
go that
was where
far.
I heard.
Plus, that's beyond city limits, so then they would,
That's in the city
That's city
limits.
limits.
way up there.
So I mean, this is not going to come as a surprise. I would like to end our MOA. If nothing else, I think we need a much stronger geofence. We need to identify the area, and we need much smaller hours of operation.
coming back up from a 12,000 standpoint, I'm just looking at Decorah News right now and seeing that Winneshiek County no longer has an ordinance regulating UTVs.
That's a
Does
manager report.
does city staff think that regulations of other forms of multimodal transportation will have home rule yanked from them?
Well, I wasn't surprised to see it happen, but as it stands today, Dave and I had a conversation last week about, not to skip ahead, but we have seen that violation as well of UTVs on city streets. And I say we, as in I personally, other staff. I don't know if has PD had any encounters
They shared with
with
me.
UTVs.
That's fair.
Yeah.
When we talked today.
So, at this
It's-
time, the way the code was written, they were very explicit and said cities can retain that right to make that
To regulate
determination.
things that are not cars.
Correct.
UTVs, ATVs, and golf carts. Yeah.
I could see.
And scooters?
I think the big one that's come up now lately, just because the state changed that law, is the UTVs and ATVs and golf carts. I don't think they're including scooters in there.
Correct, they do not. Not in that piece of
But
legislation.
scooters would be like bicycles, which we can regulate.
The closest thing to a definition of a scooter in state code is
Electronic
they do have
mobility assistance device.
Well, they do have electric bicycles because there's a state code on
There is a definition of it.
restriction on motor size or speed. Yeah.
correct. There is a definition of e-bicycle, and then that does include a saddle. You must be sitting on it. Motorized was it motorized pedestrian assist
Electronic
mobility
motorized
device
assistance.
or something?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Thank you.
Not a
It's-
scooter?
Well, I think it was meant to be a Segway, is what I think it was meant to be. But that's the closest thing that even PD has found is a definition in state code.
But I just want to make sure I guess, two questions. The first is, I mean, there have been some flagrant violations of enforceable ordinances and laws. Is that accurate, Chief?
Say again?
People under the age of 16 have been riding these things, and people have been riding them on the sidewalks, which violates our city codes. Is that
Again,
Correct.
not code, that's Decorah.
just the
ordinance.
okay,
Why do I keep
got
saying
you.
that?
That's why you would want an
Or-
ordinance to back up the MOA if we kept going with
Correct.
this thing. All right, that's helpful. Because I do wonder if our, if our public safety is so concerned about the safety issues, I guess I would hope that there'd be more of a prioritization of enforcement.
I don't think it's a matter of officers looking the other way. I think it's getting a phone call that there's a bird scooter going by Coriana. By the time we get up there, there's no bird scooter going by it. How do you track that one down? It's not a matter of officers looking the other way. It's a matter of response. And the same thing with the vehicles being dumped in the yards. That's not officers looking the other way. Bird scooters being parked sideways, 4 of them this morning on College Drive, blocking the sidewalk. That's not officers looking the other way on a crime. That's bird scooters not keeping up their end of the agreement.
Right. So I certainly didn't say that officers are looking the other way.
I know it, but it's
I
not,
don't
it's not an
appreciate
enforcement
the
issue.
insinuation that I did.
Right?
I guess the question I was asking was, has there, if there are ordinances are enforceable, like what can we do to enforce them
Should we
better?
hire another police officer to just handle bird scooters? I mean, that's what I feel like.
I hear you don't like them.
No, it's
But
just
I
like,
think that bicycles are the same way. Like, people
They're-
could dump their.
bicycles are not
I
the
had a
same way.
bike. I had a bike dumped in front of my house for X number of months, and happily, somebody dumped a bunch of bird scooters in front of my house this week. So, I contacted Bird. I was able to get rid of them. We have the same issues in the C3 with people riding bicycles or skateboards or non-powered scooters. You're not going to catch those people because they're gone.
But if somebody drops a bicycle in your yard and you call us up and say, come get this bike, we come get it. Nobody claims it. We auction it.
That makes
And
sense.
I bought.
do we have
and
the
I
same
bought
Can't
one.
do that with bird scooters.
Yeah.
Chief, do we have the same issues with personal owned property of things like bikes?
Yeah, that's why
scooters?
we have the auction every spring, because there's a lot of bikes.
I can't bike half a mile in our town without coming across a truck blocking a sidewalk. I mean, I don't think that that's reason to end that entire mode of transportation, to be clear. But when there are a small percentage of people who are bad actors, and you address that issue, and I think that an outright ban on a super low carbon, convenient, fast, reliable transportation device, I think that's a bridge too far.
Do you have data to suggest that the people who are using bird scooters were actually using cars? Maybe they were just walking. I mean, most of the people I see using scooters or know who use scooters, even when I went to use a scooter myself, were for a joyride, right? I mean, the kids running down scootering down my street at 18 miles an hour on Ravine with known potholes, right? They weren't trying to get somewhere. They were just out joyriding. And I appreciate fun. I really do. But not at the risk that they're causing and sort of the mess. It's like a pigeon
So it's
problem
litter.
downtown.
So what you really don't like is the litter.
I don't like the liability, actually. I don't like the 14-year-old in the hospital. I don't like that they don't have helmets.
That's on her, right?
Kind of. I don't like that there aren't helmets. I find them to be dangerous. I don't like that there's not docking stations. There are lots of things I don't like. Honestly, what I don't like is that of all the issues that I've had to deal with in my time on council, the one that I've heard the most of, the most people upset about, my listening sessions, right, are bird scooters. When I look across the country, when I look across the world, right, Greece is banning them, Portugal is banning them, Cedar Rapids is trying to get rid of them. Like, it's not as if people are in love with scooters who live in an area. So, yeah, I guess I'm reiterating the fact that not only do I not love them, I don't know many people that do, except you two.
I just have fun on it. Like, it's really fun.
I think it's fun, too. I had fun, you know?
No, you know what? Honestly, like, I am not super invested in whether or not Bird continues to provide this concession in Decorah. What I am super invested in is that Decorah continues to be a place that allows for various modes of transportation and encourages especially the ones that cost us less money and cost us less space. And any time that you do a new thing, it is hard because people just see the downsides of the new thing, and it's really hard to see the upsides as well. So I see some of that dynamic present in this discussion, and I certainly hope that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, because I think there's a bunch of good baked into this.
And if we go back to the former Bird employee, August, potentially, right, exactly. And I assume that he'll be getting a call as soon as he leaves the meeting. What we've all heard is nobody likes them in a place that they shouldn't be. You alluded to the fact that you thought there was risk and whatnot. There's risk in lots of things as far as operating in a public area. And I guess my concern is that, and Stephen made a good point, that change is hard. Change is hard. We've never done it this way before. I think it's premature, especially because they don't need us to operate here unless we have an ordinance saying we don't. And if we really are just opposed to where they're placed, then having an ordinance that where you're regulating business, I think you'd have to be really careful in crafting your ordinance, and that is regulating a business. And I'm just not sure the best way to do that. So I'm just concerned.
So I
Okay,
don't,
just a minute. Okay, with the process for this would have to be that this would come before the council at the next meeting, and they would have to vote on it, that it would be terminated in 30 days from that
Correct.
date?
If I have two council members tell me they want an action item on the
Okay.
next agenda to terminate or consider termination, it'll be on there.
so I want to go back to what Ross said, and then I'll have a suggestion. But I don't think change is hard. I actually think change is good. I do believe in science, data points, and I definitely trust my public safety to make informed decisions, and they don't seem to want them in my conversations with them. I can look across at other cities that have done this. It's not as if we're some groundbreaking town that all of a sudden just got scooters. They're all over the country. Councils are starting to ban them. I guess I'm sort of like, all right, can't we look around us and see what's happening? I don't know that there's will on council to get rid of them. But then I would like to see us work with Bird Scooter, as I said, limit hours of operation and limit where they can be. At least, I mean, can we all agree to take them off the highway? Can we agree?
Can you take a bike off the highway, though? They don't operate at highway speed.
You can take bikes off controlled access highways. And I think something that no one's addressing here is that if we chose to not have Bird scooters in town, we could pass an ordinance treating abandoned scooters like litter. I mean, it's not as if we don't have options here.
That's
And-
just more work for city staff.
Well, No, I'm just saying I'm just, refuting the premise that we don't have leverage here. That we're stuck with them if they want to stay because it's a legal vehicle. It can be a legal vehicle, which I'm glad for, but that doesn't mean we can allow people to leave vehicles on our sidewalks. That's the thing about them that I think is the tremendous downside. It may be that it outweighs the tremendous upside of mobility, but I feel like we're a month into this thing.
The one thing is to have you contact the person, Kylie, is that her name? To pass on the discussion that we've had and what we've considered and what are some of the drawbacks that we've seen and the issues that we have, and get feedback for us. And then discuss it, when we're going to have the next city council meeting. But so that they maybe could make some corrections that might fit better.
Yep. I will do that, and I'll ask her to tentatively pencil August 1 for us.
Yeah, because if they can come up with a dock solution, I think it would eliminate a lot of headaches.
I think
Okay.
there's more issues than just
I do
that.
too, and it's not their model. I mean, they haven't done
Well-
it for anybody else that's asked.
No, but that's a way to proceed to be able to get it in the right position. Okay, city manager and department head.
Okay, so, one, do want to point out, so with the senior center, Still collecting information on operations. Did have Greg go through and inspect the property, and so want to thank the senior citizens for hosting Greg there. Do want to point out, so if the general public wants to go and look at the facility as this conversation unfolds, August 24th from 2 to 4, my understanding they are holding an open house. And then we already touched on it, but I do want to drive this home. UTVs are still prohibited on city streets. We've had several reports, even right in downtown. I've personally witnessed, and again, to Dave's point, I will say I didn't call PD because what's PD gonna do? Show up to where I was and they were and not find them? So they're here. We're having them show up. They need to stop unless council changes course. That's it. That's all I have.
Let's see, Carrie, do you have anything since you're on?
No, I do not, Mayor.
Thank you.
How's the website update and communications stuff going?
We met with IROC Web last week, and so they wanted more details, how we wanted to go forward, how we wanted to operate. So our task right now is to go through the website and see what we do not want to keep. And then they're going to start designing it and kind of go from there. So we are moving forward with it.
Do we have a chance of input on what we do want to see?
Yeah, you can definitely send me, if you have thoughts or what you want to see, I would appreciate you contacting me or emailing me.
Yeah, it's just good to know where we are in the process. And then Chopper, I know it's, or Carrie, as the communications officer, I'm not sure where the process stands, but what about the text alert system?
Well, I can speak to that right now. So we are in conversations. The biggest thing is as to how to start marketing and that. And so we'll be working on that yet.
We've actually identified Sustainability Commission that I can't remember what that subcommittee group is called. Is it just communication? They want to become involved. So actually, we as staff believe that's a great task for them to carry out. Is we've already got some marketing material for distribution. Let's give it to Sustainability Commission committee and let them run with it.
I would like to see a timeline as far as implementation. I don't want this to be a sustainability, a long-term project.
Yep.
I can get you a timeline.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, anything else? Anybody else at the table want to contribute? Hearing none. Let's see, Kurt Johnson.
Nothing, Mayor.
Ross Hadley.
I have guests from Ireland in town this week who took advantage of bird scooters, who took advantage of the Winnesheet County Fair, and have thoroughly enjoyed Decorah and the hospitality. We took them to Pulpit Rock and to Landing and Impact and some of our city highlights, and they're going to go back and be our tourism gurus in Ireland. So hopefully we have a steady stream of Irish contingents coming up.
Tell them how great bird scooters are, huh?
They had fun.
Steve Zittegruin.
Just that, as I notified you all about at the prior meeting, the mayor's ad hoc housing subcommittee, which has not met since the last council meeting, has discussed this rural housing readiness program, and you know, based on the mayor's and my and Travis's investigation into its suitability, I think the mayor and I are planning on placing this on the agenda for council consideration at the first meeting in August. So if you have questions about that in the meantime or want to hear more, please do feel free to reach out to me. Thanks.
Let's see. I got an opportunity to be a coach at the Park Rec golf program last week. We had 21 kids signed up. I think 20 showed up. The weather was perfect. We had a good time. Went to the soccer field, hit balls up there for an hour each morning. And then Friday, the weather didn't look like it was going to cooperate, but it finally cleared about 8 o'clock, so we got on the golf course at 9. They got to play 3 or 4 holes. The kids were ecstatic. We got a couple of possible PGA Tour professionals coming up, Logan Gedkin and Taven Brill.
Well, he could probably at least beat his dad.
But no, the kids had a good time. It was a lot of fun. Enjoyed it.
Thanks. Emily?
Yeah, I want to thank city staff who've met with me over the last week. I've been making the rounds. I haven't emailed all of you, but I'll get to you. And I've just been meeting with city staff and learning more about their vision and what they've been up to, and it's been great. And we have great staff, and I'm very grateful for all the work that they're doing, so thank you for all that you're doing. I've also hosted 2 listening sessions. Yesterday I had 12 people in attendance. Today I had 6. Which to me is a win because I've had these before and I usually get 1 or 2. So it's been great. And just for council, I mean, I think there's a lot of concern over the 40-unit apartment complex. I think it's really important that we're talking about it, letting people know what we've done, what our thoughts are, so that there isn't so much discussions happening that I on Facebook or rumors, or I feel like people feel like we're like 100 miles down a road that we just took the first step on. And so I really encourage council members to reach out to their constituents, talk to them in the streets. And
I think it's important for people to know that I have never talked with anyone about anything of 40 apartment units. I haven't spoken with any of you about it. I haven't spoken with any of the developers about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, as I said, I think it's just important to know the process that's happened, which is, I think people think a lot more has happened. That said, I also, the hot topics, Quick Start and scooters, not a shock. But I do think communication has come up. I'm excited to think about a website. I think we still need to keep our eye on how we're communicating as a city, how we're getting information out, when do we need to do news releases, how do they need to do that. So I encourage that we still have work to do in terms of people understanding how we do and what we do. And I know being in this seat, it can be frustrating. You're like, our meetings are online and we publish our agendas, but I think people like to be talked to. I think they like to have conversations, and that's on us as city council members, and figuring out some more ways that people can call in or ask questions that can work, or the newsletter idea Lenita had, but I just don't think we should end our topics about communications at an app and a website. Other than that, it's been a great week in Decorah, a great summer. I hope our river goes down soon and people will be on the river more, but.
I think, let's see, did I hit all of the council? Yeah. I just wanted to state what a great week it was for the Winship County Fair, and the upgrades that that board has made were extremely beneficial. I'll call it the arena, but the 4-H building is huge, and I know that that could be used for many different things for anybody in the public, but I got a lot of compliments, even though I don't have anything to do with it, that people said they really enjoyed it. They had a good time. It was clean. It was well set up, and people just really had a good time at the fair. So I just wanted to pass that on. Anything else for tonight? Hearing none? Motion to adjourn.